Happy Valentine's Day, everybody! Hey, that means that we've been doing consistent videos for like a month and a half. Rocking it. As apt as we are and very current, we're going to talk about some romance books that you guys should read for Valentine's Day. Whether you have a partner to read them with or not, they're well worth the read, and we did our best to try and pick books from different genres, so we didn't just give you three like copies of the same sort of book. So hopefully that also adds some interest.
Starting off over here with me, I'm going to go way far out there for historical fiction, and particularly Egyptian historical fiction, because I once wanted to be an Egyptologist and then all of my dreams broke, as dreams often do. Happy Valentine's Day. This is The Heretic Queen by Wherein, and it is Egyptian historical fiction about Ramses the Great and his wife Nefertari. It is a pseudo-sequel to Michelle's debut novel, which was called Nefertiti, about, surprise, Nefertiti, but you don't need to have read that one to read this one. And why I have this on here, it is this beautiful depiction of love that starts out, you know, they've known each other since they were very young, and sometimes when it's like, oh, we loved each other from the time that we were young and always knew we would be together, but it's not like that. They knew each other when they were young, and he's a bit older than her, and he goes off and he's having other relationships, and they kind of find their way back to each other and then really create a strong bond that you believe while all of these like Egyptian politics and stuff are going on. So it's one of those relationships that really, really builds in a beautiful way, and you believe it and you love it. And I reread this book all the time because it just makes me so happy. So if you need Egyptian historical fiction this Valentine's Day, I strongly suggest The Heretic Queen by Wherein.
Keeping in the vein of historical, I wanted to talk about 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Yeah, I'm talking about Stephen King in a romance video. Isn't that fun? For those of you who don't know, 11/22/63 is technically, I guess, historical / sci-fi. It's got some time travel stuff in it, where a person from modern day goes back to the 1950s / 60s to try and prevent the JFK assassination. And there's also a pretty super sweet romance in there that is pretty significant, and maybe the best plot point / the only plot point for the second half of the book. Definitely well worth a read if you're a fan of Stephen King, and if you're not a fan of Stephen King because you don't like horror, this might also be a good one to pick up because there isn't really many spooks. It's a slow burn historical novel about what it would be like to live back in the 1950s, late 1950s, early 1960s, and especially if you sort of knew what was going to happen. This is supposed to be talking about the romance. It doesn't start until halfway through the book, but it is probably the sweetest and best part of the book, in my opinion. Not that the rest of the book is a waste. It's a fun ride the whole way through. But yeah, there's some sweet, cute, nerdy / awkward people romance in there. It was very real, and I liked it.
Okay, there is no way in heebie-jeebus that I could get through a Valentine's Day video and not mention A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is what happens when one of my favorite authors goes, I want to write a sexy book. So yes, this book does have the smexy scenes in it, so if you are not a fan of that, then maybe this isn't for you. But if you like the sexy and you also like a really good story and a beautiful fantasy world, then this is for you. I also highly suggest this series as a whole, like if you have nothing to do on Valentine's Day and you just need to like read a series, just read this entire thing. Because while this book is so good and the romance is so fantastic, the next book makes it even better, and is probably one of the few instances where I think the middle book in a trilogy is the best. But that may just be because I'm a super swoony romantic about the middle book. Again, this is a book where the romance is earned. This book, it doesn't seem as earned as the second book. There are reasons for that, but that's what I mean. It's the kind of book where it's not just like, I saw you once and now we are deeply in love and shall be married. It's a book where it's like romance is hard, romance is weird, feelings are hard, and emotions should go die in a hole, but they come together and make a beautiful, beautiful sexy romance. So if that's what you're into, I highly, highly suggest this series.
Again, following that vein, if what you're looking for is the sexy, sexy romance sexy times, then I have an urban fantasy book on my list, and that's Dark Needs at Night's Edge. And if that title didn't tell you that it was romance, I don't know what I can do to make it more romancy. It's technically urban fantasy, so it's going to have the natural monsters in them. So you're going to have werewolves and vampires and things like that, which lots of people find super sexy, especially in our sort of modern time. Post-Twilight world. Even before Twilight, that was a pretty sexy thing to have around. This one in particular is my favorite. It's written by Kresley Cole, which some folks who read YA might recognize. This is her adult urban fantasy romance series. The thing I really like about her books is that because it is romance and the romance is the main focus of the plot, the overarching plot that's happening in the world is very interesting to me in the series, and I feel like that is sort of what kept me reading urban fantasy romance when I'm not a super big hard romance reader. This one I liked because one of the monsters is a ghost, so she's incorporeal, so they had to like get to know each other. Most romance books involve a lot of sex and like lust. There's some lust here, but because she's intangible and can't be touched, they had to like talk. And that was super interesting as a concept of like they actually cannot touch even though they want to. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're okay with urban fantasy, maybe pick up one of Kresley Cole's books, but Dark Needs at Night's Edge is one of my favorites.
Someday I will get through a list of any of ours without Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins, but it is not this day, and probably won't be this day for a very, very long time. Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins is a YA realistic romance about a girl who goes away for her senior year of high school to a boarding school in France. And when I am feeling sad, when I just want to die in a hole, when I believe that there's nothing beautiful left in this world, I read this book, and every single time I am just filled with so much love and happiness, and I laugh. Not only is there a really strong romance element to it, and the kind of romance element that deals with how high school love is hard, and I think that that will translate to like any relationship that people have. It's just like sometimes there are obstacles, sometimes there are, it's hard to talk about your feelings, and sometimes, there are other people involved. Even when it's a relationship between one person and another person, there are people around the situation that make it even more difficult. But it's also just about friendship and other relationships, and also, being true to yourself. And I'm not a very emotive reader, but I laugh every time I read this book. And I just love it a lot. And I know the plot sounds like, oh my god, I've read this book 700 times, but every time I tell somebody about this book, I'm like, no, but you haven't read this one. This one is the one that does it well, and I love it, and I love it a lot. So if I had to say any of these books like on this list that I want you to read right now, for me anyways, because I haven't read Michaela's, it would be this one. Like, this is the book I just want to hand to everyone and just be like, the world is an okay place today. So if you're already in love and the world's already an okay place, you can only get better. So just read this book. That's the end of the story.
For my last pick, I wanted to pick something that was non-heteronormative, and I was sort of split between two things. The first was The Errant Prince by Sasha Miller, and the second was The Tiger's Daughter by Kay Arsenault Rivera. The first book being one with gay romance, this one being one with a lesbian romance. I ended up picking this one because I like it a little bit better than The Errant Prince, and The Errant Prince is super short. It's a novella. It's not a full book. This is a full book, and in fact part of a trilogy that involves two women who fall in love. The thing that I really like about this one is that it's one woman writing down the story of the two women's romance and the other one reading it, because they've sort of been forced to be apart for a number of years after their wedding and after all of this stuff. So that premise might seem a bit weird to you, like why would you read your own story? But I think the thing that was interesting was that one character was getting the perspective of the other character, like what it was like to fall in love with herself, which was kind of an interesting premise. It's a super sweet romance. There's none of that like tropey thing where like the lesbian and gay characters die because they're bad and evil and heathens. Their romance is not necessarily accepted in their world, but it's also not a taboo in the same way. Like, people are generally heteronormative, but they're not like, ew, gross, how could you? It's just different, and I really appreciated that perspective. It's a fantasy set in an Asian world, I think based loosely off of Mongolia, Japan, China area. So if that sounds interesting to you, also look at the cover. It's beautiful. Tor has been killing it with the covers as of late. So yeah, if you want something not heteronormative, either of those books are good choices, especially if you're a fan of fantasy.
That is all that we have for you today, but of course we could go and go and go and go and go on this topic. So if you're like, hey, I have more, I want more recommendations for fantasy, or I want more recommendations for horror romance. Obviously that's Michaela's niche. Put that down in the comments, chat with us, ask if you have recommendations of books you think that we would like based on things that we said that we love about these romances. I personally am always looking for a good YA romance that does not make me want to stick hot pokers in my eyeballs. Because I am a smoosh reader, but a lot of YA is just like, oh God, I hurt. So also leave those down in the comments. They're always appreciated. And don't forget that at the end of this month, the last Wednesday of February, we are doing another Bibliomancy for Beginners episode. This one is on The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And if you have read that already, I know a lot of people have, please join us. If you've been looking for an excuse to read it, we've given it to you. Obviously, our book club is the reason that everyone should read all the books we pick. So read it and join us for that. It'll be a good discussion. I'm really enjoying this cycle. It is the second book in our cycle of Own Voices picks. Go back in time and rewatch Michaela's pick, which was Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. And going forward towards March, Taylor has picked a book called Being Fishkill. I don't know anything else about it except for lesbians so far. So I look forward to getting into that with you guys. So join us, watch us, talk with us, and happy Valentine's Day, or happy anti-Valentine's Day if that is how you are feeling. Bye!